What is up, fellas, and welcome to another episode of Rewriting History with me, the Goob. I've got a couple different topics I'm bringing to you today, a little bit of discussion about the vases. There's been a lot of continued work going on, so just trying to bring you a little bit of news on those. And then a whole lot of very interesting stuff in India. I have some slides prepared, which it was a hassle preparing those slides. There's got to be a better way of doing it than inserting the pictures individually onto each slide and then resizing them. I feel like there must be a way to just upload the pictures and apply them to slides. Maybe not, but I'll get it figured out. But I've got a couple links down below in the description. One of them is for the vases, the discussion on those. There's been a claim that I mentioned in a previous video that I said I didn't want to get into yet because it's not entirely clear exactly how these measurements were taken and how significant these measurements are. But one of the recent claims that's been made is that they have scanned the base of one of these vases. So just the circumference of the very bottom part of the vase, the flat part of the vase. And they're saying that it's within 0.4 microns of perfection. So a red blood cell, I believe, is 5 or 6 microns, and this is 10 times smaller than that, 0.4 microns. But the way that this data was presented was suggesting that they didn't measure the entire circumference of the vase. They took 4 points on an X. So they took right angle, drew straight lines across the vase, and then where those lines intercept the edge of the vase, that's what they measured. And those 4 points measured within 0.4 microns of symmetrical. So if that's all they did, which it seems like that's all they did, that doesn't necessarily suggest a level of precision that's actually within the micron range. You don't even need a round object to potentially have that type of precision within those 4 points. So, I think that largely speaking, they very fairly have represented their data. They haven't outright lied about their data, but this individual piece, which they're not really putting forward, is they're not like shouting this from the rooftops. They mentioned that they had this measurement and that they're still calculating, still processing all of the other data to get the rest of the measurements. But they are using this, I think it's X-ray, some type of X-ray scan that does measure things down into the micron range. So there's a lot of continued work on these vases. They are scanning 18th dynasty vases right there. So they're scanning some of these more modern alabaster vases, which I've talked about and shown on the show before. They're beautiful vases. They are, but they're also very obviously a totally different category of vase. I mean, you can look at them and see that they're not straight. They're not perfectly even. They're wobbly. And this is thousands of years later when you might expect technology to be better. And these are significantly softer stone, right? Alabaster is as soft as marble, a very, very soft stone. But in that video, they also show some of these vases that they're discussing, and you get a look into the inside of one of these vases a little bit, and you can very clearly see it's very roughly finished. It's not finished at all. You can see groove marks from where it was cut by what I assume was a tube drill. It's very rough. At the same time, you can also see a very sharp transition, a very clear, distinct transition from where, it's going down straight, where the tube drill is going down, and then it's this bulbous shape, and you can see it going hollowed out, very, very clean edge all the way around, hollowed out in this shape. So, the surface is rough. It's not polished at all, but they're still making these, what I would call pretty precise, clean. They're shaping it still very well on the interiors. And they're working on scanning these interiors. Some of these vases are pretty darn small. They're too small to get something like a laser scanner inside of them. So they're working on figuring out how to scan the insides of these vases and put that together. I'm really excited to see that. But they're just doing more and more work on this, which I think is fantastic. I think a lot more work needs to be done. I think that there's already enough here to rewrite history, right? These vases clearly were not made with the hand tools that they were originally suggested to be made by. And I don't necessarily jump to super high technology of CNC machines and digital tech and lasers. I suspect it's a lot more akin to the Antikythera mechanism situation, right? That was written about. We had documents written in describing the Antikythera mechanism, and those were dismissed. Those were dismissed as fanciful, just stories, because obviously something like that is way too complex to have existed 2,000 years ago in Greece. And it was found and sat on a shelf for 100 years, which is probably the only reason that we actually know about it today. And it didn't get, scurried off to the black market or just hidden away or something like that, because it sat there for almost 100 years. And then we started x-raying it and realizing just how impressive it is. And ClickSpring, I praise him all the time. I'll continue praising him. If you haven't checked out his videos yet, go check out his videos on the Antikythera mechanism. He's demonstrating how this incredibly complex machine, this incredibly impressive machine, can be made using primitive techniques, right? There's no digital or modern technology required. It's an absolute marvel of ingenuity. It's such a marvel of ingenuity that historians wrote it off as a myth, as something that couldn't have possibly existed until they had the physical evidence in their hands, right? So I think we're dealing with something similar here with like the vases, something that is just absolutely ingenious and well beyond anything that we thought these pre-dynastic Egyptians are capable of, but still primitive techniques, right? Just as in that it's not digital, it's not electronic. And I could be wrong, that we could be dealing with some super high-tech Atlantean mythical civilization. I really have no idea, but my suspicion would be Antikythera situation where it's primitive, but it's just absolutely ingenious. And speaking on the vases, I've got this slideshow here prepared, and I am going to be talking about India. And so to weave the two topics together a little bit, this is the Ivanian, I think is the name of the temple. It's in Hawaii. I think I might have put a link. I might have forgotten that link in the description. There might be a link in the description to this temple. But it's a temple built in modern times. It's built in the last 100 years. It took 33 years to build, and it was done using traditional techniques and iron chisels. But these are a collection of granite vases, red granite vases that were produced with iron chisels for this temple. So I think it would be absolutely fantastic. I'm going to try tweeting at some of these guys after the show and see if they might be able to make their way to Hawaii and measure some of these vases. These are created in modern times, but using primitive techniques. And so they're not obviously an exact one-for-one with the pre-dynastic Egyptian vases. These seem to have either a straight opening on the inside or potentially even tapered downwards like this. So it's not a one-for-one, but I think it would be really fascinating to see how these compare to those pre-dynastic vases. And the whole temple, I don't have a lot of pictures of this Ivanian temple pulled up, but feel free to look it up. I might even Ivanian temple, Hawaii. Pull up a couple of pictures here. Iraven temple, not Ivanian. Iraven, Iraivan. It's It's an impressive, it's a beautiful temple. Let me share my screen here. Okay. It's a beautiful temple, but you can see that it's just not, I had a window pulled up. Yeah, this is actually, let me share this tab. Let me go back up to the top. So you can see it's just not that large of a temple. It's not incredibly small, but it's not that large. It's not all that ornately decorated. Excuse me while I scroll through trying to find the pictures here. You know, you can see the pillars are decorated. There's 24 pillars here, but they're not nearly as decorated as a lot of the ancient temples. You can see they are some beautiful pillars, but you can also just see this is rather plain. It's rather plain. It's rather small in comparison to a lot of the older stuff. And this took 33 years to build. This took 33 years to construct. So just putting things into perspective a little bit as we go on talking about, you know, the rest of these Indian temples that I'm about to bring up. Yeah, the YouTube censor, it seems not nearly as bad in the live chat. It seems like they don't censor too much in the live chat, but they really, really like to censor comments. And definitely rest in peace, Peanut. Yeah, I don't know if that would work or not, Mr. Slav. I think mirrors are already how those laser scans are used. So you have a laser and then it's bounced off a mirror that's moving rapidly. So, I mean, theoretically, I think what you're describing could be done, but how difficult would that be to program and create? And I don't know. That's, you know, the people that are scanning these vases are not laser scan engineers. They're people that are interested in these vases, you know, so that's probably outside of their wheelhouse to do something like that. But they are putting cameras in there, recording them, and then they're going to try and stitch the images together and 3D model it as best as they can. It's an imperfect system. Hopefully they figure out something better, but you know, the work is continuing, the work is improving. Any new data, I think, is very valuable here. But man, I have a rodent problem myself right now. I've got rats under my house and been fighting those buggers. It's a pain. So before I even get back onto the vases, before I jump into the India stuff, this is a libation bowl from Hathor. You can kind of see the Hathor face there in the corner. It's not the most exquisite face, but then you see this thing. And this was clearly not carved with hand tools. I mean, just look at it. Like there was obviously some type of tool there that was producing those circular forms, in my opinion. Maybe I'm off base. And I don't know what type of stone this is. It could be schist. It could be basalt. I'm not sure. But this is from, I believe, the Pietre Museum, which that video on the vases link down below talks about. And there are some really interesting things in there. There's this part about plate number 8 that Pietre found, which is this tiny little piece of a vase that's been broken off. And he noticed that on the interior, there's a seemingly consistent curve on the interior. And then right before the lip of the vase, right before that lip going out to the exterior, the angle changes, but he suspects that it's the same exact curve, just on a different angle. So you have the interior curving up like this, and then you have it, you know, curving up again, where they discuss it. And I mean, just the observational skills of Pietre. I seem to have frozen. Great frame to freeze on. But the observational skills of Pietre to even notice that are absolutely astounding. His work is very impressive. But they're looking into all kinds of this stuff. If they do measure those two curves and they do happen to actually be consistent curves that match each other, that implies a lot about the manufacturing process. I'm really frozen here. Quite frozen. So, so anyways, I thought it was very interesting. I think it's very interesting that they're continuing to look. This is also from that Ivanian temple, whatever I said it was. Just some Cyclopean masonry. This is with lava rock, so very soft stone. And I don't think you could necessarily claim that you couldn't fit a razor blade in between there. But people like to get excited about Cyclopean stone. Here's an example from modern times of these oddly shaped polygonal walls up at this Hawaiian temple. And I think before I get into the India stuff proper, I am going to share some more stuff. This is a bit of just random nubs and interesting stuff that I found while I was looking in India. Let me find the right tab here. I believe it's this one. Okay. So this is also in the link down below, the arts and culture link. It provides, I think, 18 different Indian temples where basically they Google mapped it. And so you can take a digital walkthrough of this place and, you can hold your phone up. And I'm still frozen. Let me see if I'm going to come right back. I'm going to remove my. Okay. It just seems like my camera has stopped working, which happened last time I streamed too. So that's a bit of an issue. I don't know what to do about that. But anyways, you can take a digital tour, and wherever you point your phone, it will look there. So it's pretty cool. You can move around the site. You can look around the site. If you're using a smartphone, if you're using your computer, you can look around with a mouse. But here you see some nubs on this wall. This is a huge temple complex, and it largely looks finished, but then you see these nubs. And then it gets even more confusing when you look even closer, because here you see nubs on this part of the wall. Then you see this perfectly smooth portion right next to it. And if you look further down, I've got some better pictures here, but if you look further down, you see those blocks are sticking out. So here you get a look of those blocks I was just mentioning. And if you look closely, it looks like the edges have already been flattened out over here and over here. They started to flatten this one out. It's not perfectly flat, but you can see that they removed the majority of the material. So it would seem that these blocks are unfinished, and the end goal was this perfectly flat here. You see two more unfinished blocks here, which is very strange. But it gets even more confusing and even more strange when you go back to the first picture and you're realizing that these nubs are left on the parts that have already been flattened out. So the blocks start like this, it would seem, with these big jut outs that are then flattened, which it's confusing to me why you would construct like that, why you would have so much extra material and then cut it down. Maybe there's a reason that makes sense. I'm not a stonemason, but that seems a bit confusing to me. But it gets even more confusing when it's left unfinished like this and randomly unfinished like this. And then even more confusing when you realize that the nubs are on the parts that have already been flattened. Just very strange to me. The nubs do not make sense to me. The nubs cannot be hand waved away. You can see some of the size of this temple in the back, but it's a whole complex. There's even more than just this one building. But yeah, check out the arts and culture website. Do take a virtual tour. I think it's very cool that, you can do that. And then I just have some pictures of India. This is a very old picture. I don't even know what city this is, but old India here. Pretty cool stuff. I don't remember why I included this. I don't remember a reason for this. It's just a wall in India. Kind of cool, I suppose. This is the top of an Asoka pillar, which I'm going to be talking about later, the Barabar Caves and the Asoka pillars, which date back older than just about any of the other megalithic works or any of the temples in India. Another old city in India. This is Bodh Gaya before it was restored. Pretty cool stuff. And this is the Kailasa Temple, a very old picture of the Kailasa Temple, which I'll be talking about more in this video. And you can just see the state it's in, you know, the plants and the roots growing in here. This, do I have, let me, okay, I do. All right, I'll talk about that now then. So the Kailasa Temple, in my opinion, is one of, if not the most impressive ancient structure that's still intact today. This was carved out of this granite mountain you can see behind it. It is one solid piece. It was allegedly carved in 18 years. So the mainstream is somewhat split on this because there is a written account that says this was carved 18 years, 1,200 years ago. The mainstream agrees it was 1,200 years ago that this was constructed, but some speculate it took about 150 years because 18 years is just a little bit too hard to believe that they worked that fast. That's really all it's based off of. But they accept the 20-year timeline for the Great Pyramid of Egypt. So, you know, they really just pick and choose what they decide to believe in and what they don't. An army was sent to destroy this thing, and there is some damage here. Elephant trunks have been broken off. You know, some of the railings have been broken off and stuff, but largely this whole structure is still intact and in pretty good shape. And a lot of people in the alternate history community, they like to jump to 12,000 years ago, right? Everything was this pre-Diluvian 12,000 years ago. Everything that's super impressive in the Kailasa Temple is definitely super impressive. It was all built 12,000 years ago. Well, there's several reasons why I don't believe this is the case. And one of them is right here. This is the wall, one of the walls on the Kailasa Temple. And this is the Mahabharata that's carved into the side of here, or potentially one of the other holy books in Hindu. I think it was the Mahabharata, though. And I suppose you could argue that this was carved in later, that the original structure existed and that was added in later, but that gets a lot more, becomes a bit more of a stretch when you look at, you know, like the roof. You've clearly got Hindu art on the top. You've clearly got a Hindu god right there. So is all of this carved in later, right? And if you're carving in these camels, I believe they are, I'm not 100% sure if those are horses or what animal precisely. But anyways, you know, like clearly the Mahabharata, the holy book, was carved as a part of this temple. The entire temple is adorned with this story and with Hindu decorations. And the Mahabharata has wars in it that happened 1,500 years ago. So it couldn't possibly be older than 1,500 years because it's depicting real world events that happened 1,500 years ago. And you can see the roots growing over here. You can see how much nature has damaged this structure in the couple hundred years that it was abandoned. So the idea that this is from 12,000 years ago is just, I reject it. I just reject that idea. This is obviously within the last 1,500 years. And I would probably agree with the mainstream that it was about 1,200 years ago. So I bring all of this up because I'm going to be showing more examples of things that I think might fit into the category of these pre-dynastic vases. I think these Kailasa temples, this Kailasa temple could even fit into the category of these pre-dynastic vases where we're looking at something missing. There's a missing technology. There's very clearly a missing technology for those vases. And I think we're quite possibly looking at a missing technology here. The idea of iron chisels, which in that there's a documentary on that Ivanian temple where they mentioned that the iron chisels last for about 5 minutes of chiseling before they have to be refired and sharpened in a coal furnace. So, you know, it's I know the mainstream likes to go slave labor and they just had time and labor. It's nothing but time and labor. But this Kailasa Temple right here is part of 34 different caves and temples, all carved into this granite mountain. So this is the most impressive one of the 34, but there are 33 other temples, some of them very, very impressive in caves, all again carved out of one solid piece of granite. You've got, these large rooms you walk in with pillars all coming up out of the ground, going to the ceiling of this cave. You walk in, and then inside of the cave is a smaller than this, but again, a full temple carved out of one piece of granite. There's 34 of these. The amount of granite removed from the Kailasa Temple alone is estimated to be 500,000 tons of granite, 500,000 tons of granite. And there's 33 other caves and temples right here in this mountain. None of that granite rubble has ever been found. We have no idea what happened to the millions of tons of granite that was removed to make these caves and temples. And, if the mainstream is going, it took 150 years just for this Kailasa temple. Okay, what about the 33 other caves and temples here? How much time did that take? And then what about the tens of thousands of other temples across the continent of India and Indonesia and those areas? Like, something isn't adding up to me. And the idea that it was just purely labor and time is difficult for me to accept. I've talked a lot on this channel in the past about how corrupted our modern world is and how broken it is and how deliberately oppressed we are. We have 8 billion people on the planet today, far more population than we have ever had in the past. We have a technological leverage that can't even be quantified. And I mean that very literally. Like, how many man hours, how many men does it take to equate flying a plane around the world? It doesn't matter how many men you have, you just can't do something like that. Our technological leverage is infinite compared to our past. Our population has skyrocketed, our technological leverage has skyrocketed, and our quality of life, our free time, our production has all plummeted. So yes, our world is extremely broken, but it's still kind of difficult for me to accept that it's broken to the point that this is the state we're living in. And in the past, all of that was done with iron chisels. And maybe that's a failing on my part. Maybe the modern world truly is that broken. But man, that's a real black pill and hard to accept there. Because that's what the mainstream wants you to accept. This was all done with iron chisels. Why is our production capability so garbage today? Why aren't we building anything like this today? Not even anything close to this. And I showed that Ivanian temple, but that's really doesn't compare to this. All the 8 billion people in infinite technological leverage, and our quality of life is decreasing on a daily basis. Our production, right? It's just hard to accept, man. It's hard to accept. Let me read through this chat real quick. I wish my camera was working. I don't know what to do about that. The little light is on my laptop, but doesn't seem to be working. Oh, you guys have been chatty. Yeah, the squirrel story really is crazy. I mean, the government doesn't have any business telling people what kind of animals they can own. Generally speaking, I would agree with that. Like, I do understand, because I am against animal cruelty. There are dumb people out there. There are people that'll try and have like a tiger living in their living room. And I'm not even talking about, oil money living room over in the Middle East, but I'm talking like your traditional suburban household. Someone will try and have a tiger living in there, and that's animal cruelty, right? So I do understand to some extent why there's some limitations, but yeah, man, if the animal's happy, you're happy. Like, they have no business. They just have no business. Yeah, I am going to set up a water trap because I laid out 24 feet of glue traps under my house today and a bunch of other stuff. But I've got a large family of rats that moved in very abruptly, and yeah, going to set up a water trap. Welcome, Fame. I don't know if I've seen you before. Yeah, so I'm right there with you, Fame. I think maybe 6,000 or 7,000 years ago, because you see Sumeria and stuff around that time. So I think something happening about around that time in Sumeria being a restarting of civilization, not just this launching of this super advanced civilization out of nothing. Because Sumeria, I talked about this in a previous episode where I gave lots of examples, but they developed literally everything all the way up until the Industrial Revolution. They had created and invented literally everything. And so all of that from nothing, again, a little hard for me to believe. I think there might have been another civilization shortly before that was wiped out. Right there with you, Fame. Black Sea flood, North America, metallurgy cessation. Yeah. Are you in my Discord? Are you a longtime watcher? These are all things we talk about. If not, you should join the Discord, man. You'd fit right in. And I absolutely agree that the sun is responsible. The sun definitely correlates. Man, enjoying the chat. All right. So on to this slideshow that I have prepared. Let's get into it. This is the Holyswara Temple. And these are some of the most impressive works in India. There's really a very long list of things. I've shown some other examples on the show before. Praveen Mohan has absolutely fantastic footage of temples in India. It's just that he has so much footage, and his titles for his videos are really not helpful when it comes to searching for content. So it's very difficult to go through his content and find what you're actually looking for. But down below, I do have a link to a video on this temple here, the Holyswara Temple. You can see these skulls are hollow, and you can't see it perfectly clearly in this angle, but it's not just a line cut into this mouth, and it's not just holes drilled into these eyes. It is actually hollowed out inside of there, and you can see that better in some of these images later. Okay, this is another temple that got mixed in here. I believe all of the rest of these photos are the Holyswara Temple. But again, just absolutely, you can see the level of detail in this work here compared to the modern temple. And I'm not trying to shit on the modern temple. It's very impressive. I'm really glad they did it. But it's on a totally different level. This is the Holyswara Temple again. And not only is there just, I wish I could zoom in. Maybe I can zoom in on this. Let me see if I can. I don't think I can because I'm presenting through Google Slides on StreamYard. So can't zoom. But anyway, the detail on this is just astounding. Like if you do zoom in and you look closely, all of these beads and all of these ropes, whatever you want to call them, all of the clothing and jewelry that's on here, like the crown as it's sitting on her head, it is not filled in the background. So the way a crown would sit on your head, it only makes contact with a couple points of your head. It's not creating a seal all the way around your head, right? And that's exactly how this crown is seated upon her head. There's actually negative space. Everywhere that there should be negative space, there is. So behind these beads, there's negative space. Underneath this necklace, there's negative space. All of this is free floating. You can see down here, like, kind of rope looking things. It's all disconnected from everything behind it. It's all hollowed out. And you can also see that her hands are missing, and this stone is hollow here, right? So some people might jump to this is cast stone, this is geopolymer. because this is granite here. I don't think this is geopolymer, but the Indians used a lot of very clever building techniques. So I don't know how many different pieces this statue is, but you can clearly see that the hands were different pieces that would slot into there. And they slot in so perfectly that when you're looking at this stuff, you can't tell there's multiple pieces here. It's, you know, just like these other structures where you can't fit a piece of paper in. And I also believe they do things like use these ropes to hide, you know, the seams and stuff. But again, it's still just absolutely exquisite stonework. It's absolutely unbelievable. And this is all supposedly done with iron chisels. I have a hard time accepting that. And I don't know exactly the techniques that were used to build the modern pillars, but lathes are often brought up when discussing Indian temples because you have so many ginormous and perfectly rounded granite pillars and other types of stone pillars in Indian temples. I would also love to see, you know, the people who scanned the Barabar caves or the people who are scanning the vases, get some measurements on these pillars. How perfectly round are they? Because they look very perfectly round. Are they? What's the tolerances on these things? There's so much work that still needs to be done. I would really love to know that kind of information. But this is very similar to those modern pillars that you saw. I'd be curious how those modern pillars were made exactly. You know, did they have some type of rotation? I don't know. I know they were made with iron chisels. That's all I really know about it. Just more statues from the Holyswara Temple. Again, more ropes that have negative space. You can see some of that detail here. Just insane. Just the level of fineness in this stuff. And this is granite. Just really, really crazy work to me. And here you can see they're going through the eye of one of these skulls and out the ear of that same skull. So you can kind of tell and see in there that there's some shadow going on, but you can kind of see inside of that mouth, this whole skull is hollowed out. These skulls are completely, you know, open on the inside, through the eyes, through the mouth, through the ears. And these skulls are on the crown of, I don't know if I have the full statue, but there it's, you know, it's like one of these statues here, except the crown has those skulls on them. They're very tiny, tiny little skulls. All of this stuff appears to be one big chunk of granite. I don't know how many pieces, like I'm pointing out with the hands here. If those hands were still there, I'm pretty confident that this would also still appear to be one big chunk of granite. So, you know, this huge statue with all of this incredibly intricate work on it with these hollow skulls, if it is all one piece, imagine the stress of chiseling out and hollowing out those skulls. And if you break one of them, that whole piece gets thrown away. So I don't think it is all one big piece. I don't know if later I have a bigger picture of this full statue. I hope I do. But yeah, I think they were constructed out of multiple pieces somehow, very, very cleverly, so that you can't see the seams. But it's still just an insane amount of time, an insane amount of precision. And how do you even do that with an iron chisel? I don't know that that's possible with an iron chisel. I'm not sure how you accomplish hollowing something out like that with an iron chisel. And there's a lot of examples just like this, you know, to be found all over India. The hollow skulls are a bit of a unique aspect here, but this really, really intricate, fine work. I believe this is another statue. It might just be a different angle, but I believe this is maybe a different statue, again, with the hands missing. Or I think it's just a mirrored image. I think that's the same statue, but mirrored left to right for some reason. And so, yeah, you know, and I showed this pillar. This is, I showed this pillar in a video a few times before. You can't really tell right here, but these are roughly like 6 to 8 inch tall little figurines that have their own little housing with their own little pillars. Again, everything is hollowed out from behind. Everything has proper negative space. Those tiny, tiny little figurines also have beaded necklaces on them. The beads are fully formed. So you don't just have a round shape on the top and then it molding into the chest of the person. You actually have a full 360 around the beads. The negative space is where it's supposed to be. The beads are only making contact in the very back part of the spheres as it would be in reality. I mean, this is just a mind-blowing level of precision, and it's on scale. There's no shortage of this type of work in India. Again, this is on the higher end. This is definitely towards the most impressive stuff you're going to find, but there are other examples of this stuff out there. And all of this, I really wish my camera was working. Oh my goodness, I took myself off. Sorry, fellas. Sorry, fellas. I don't even know how much you didn't hear. What was the last thing you heard? I was making the point that I think a lot of this stuff. My bad, fellas. Yeah, my camera. I removed myself from the stage because I didn't have the camera. Wasn't thinking that also removes my mic. Silly me. So, but I was making the point that mainstream archaeology dates everything that's impressive in India to the last 1500 years, or maybe 1800 years. I apologize if I'm getting that confused, but Hinduism came to India either 18 or 1500 years ago, within the last 2000 years, right? So there were no Hindu temples, which is what I've been showing you. And there were almost no megalithic structures in India before that time, with a few very, very significant exceptions, but only a few, which I'll get to, hopefully. Starting to run out of time. But all of this is within the last 2,000 years, some of the most impressive stuff within the last 1,000 years. So I think that some of this stuff fits in to that pre-dynastic Egyptian vase category where there's clearly some type of missing technology. I think some of this could fit into that category. And that's within the last 2,000 years. So it's a very different thing when we're talking about these vases, which are at least 5,000 years old, could be even older. We really have no idea. And we go, okay, some type of missing technology was used here, some type of lost technology. It starts to become a little bit different when we're going, yeah, we're also talking about that same kind of thing within the last 2,000 years here in India. And I don't know if you could hear me when I was saying it, but like just looking at here, it does look like these things. The mouth, it looks like it curves up and is hollowed out there. You can see a tiny little gap right there where it looks like it goes up. It's not just a line carved out here, but it's actually hollowed out from the inside. and, going back to how the crown sits on the head, all of this negative space underneath here, all of this is separated from underneath. It's just crazy, crazy levels of detail that I struggle to accept as just iron chisels. Yes, I am getting to the Bear Bar Caves. And thank you, Igor. I'll go ahead and talk about the Bear Bar Caves now, because as I just mentioned, everything's within the last 2,000 years, with a few very notable exceptions, which is the Bear Bar Caves and the Ashoka Pillars, which let me go ahead and pull up the Ashoka Pillars real quick here. They're just granite pillars, but you have these crazy, impressive granite pillars in pre-dynastic, or not pre-dynastic, but in ancient and early dynastic Egypt. Let me share my screen so you guys can see what I'm looking at. Remove that, and let's see. No, that's not working. All right, give me a moment here. No video at all. Share screen. Here we go. Okay, so these Ashoka pillars also date back over 2,000 years, and they date back to the same leader, the same guy who's credited with building the Bear Bar Caves, supposedly built these pillars. Now, a lot of these pillars are just completely plain granite pillars. There's nothing on them, and these toppers were made. I showed you one of those toppers in the very beginning of the episode, but they're just these big granite pillars that are kind of in the middle of nowhere. Again, this is before any temples. This is before really any other megalithic stuff. And you see a seam there. I think that's damaged because these were one-piece pillars. Let's see if there's an image here conveniently on Google. Some of these pillars, and the reason that they're credited to the same guy that the Bear Bar Caves are credited to, is because some of these pillars do have writing on them. I'm not seeing any of the examples here in Google Images, but they do have writing on them, and they're just like laws and stuff like that written by this king at that time. Whether these pillars are actually from that king, I don't know. There's not all of these other grand structures, but you have the Bear Bar Caves, and you have these very impressive pillars being credited to this guy over 2,000 years ago. Again, before any of these temples. India is littered with temples, but this was before any of those temples, over 2,000 years ago, that the Bear Bar Caves were created. And the Bear Bar Caves, to me, are definitely in that category of pre-dynastic Egyptian vases, where it's just something is missing. Whether the tools that were used were lasers and digital and super high tech, or whether they were quote unquote primitive, just like the Antikythera mechanism, but there's very clearly something missing. They achieved something there that we cannot explain yet. We do not have the answers for yet. There is some type of missing technique or missing technology. And I'm really grateful that these vases have opened up that conversation to be had, because the mainstream and the science believers, they would just wipe everything away with slave labor and, it just time and labor. But that's not an adequate explanation for the vases. That's not an adequate explanation for the Bear Bar Caves, right? And we haven't done the work yet, but if we start measuring these pillars in India, if we start measuring, some of these other caves, and we start looking into some of these other things, I think we're going to find that there's a whole lot more that just isn't explainable through labor and time. There was something more going on here, and it doesn't necessarily mean laser beams and aliens and digital technology, but it's something very, very impressive, and it's something we haven't figured out yet. And we need to. We definitely need to. We got to get to the bottom of it. So that is this week's episode. I'm going to be going live with the after show at 6. I've got some really cool wood etchings and copper engravings and stuff like that from like the 1500s, and some of those are copies from even older etchings. So we're looking at some ancient ruins depicted a very long time ago, hundreds of years ago, what Greek and Roman ruins looked like and stuff, and talking a little bit about mud flood, because there's some really interesting stuff in these old etchings. So sign up for the Discord, sign up for the Patreon, and join us over there. Join us in the Discord, have conversations with us, join us on the Patreon, get some extra content, and I will catch you guys next week. Peace out, fellas.